I Will Make You Proud by Wheredoesshego. Trigger warning. This fic includes talk of abuse, talk of suicide, and potential sexual content. Please read with care. Chapter 11. Power. Draco, February 1994. Draco spent the best part of the next year making sure that Granger hated him. He didn't have to try very hard. He was a hateful person. Every time he looked in the mirror and saw his own face, he was reminded of how hateful he was. He looked at his hair, his ice-cold eyes, so much like his father's, and he wanted to put his fist through the glass. However, he didn't and couldn't show any kind of weakness, so he kept his self-loathing inside. He maintained the arrogant air, his trademark now. He made sure he spent his time making everyone else's life hell, boasting to anyone who could hear about his manor, his inheritance, his father's influence, taunting people, pushing them around. He was good at looking for people's weaknesses and exploiting them. He wanted people to hate him the way he hated himself. Draco was exceptionally good at hurting people, he found out. He learned from the best, after all. The only place he ever let his guard down was down in the Slytherin common room. When he was down there, in the dark, he felt more like himself, like he was a cockroach, comfortable down in the sewer. He had developed a close friendship with Theodore Knott. There was an unspoken bond between them. They never talked about it, but they understood that the others suffered. They could smell it on each other. Draco had been down in the Slytherin dormitories at the beginning of second year, just after coming back from that agonizingly long summer holiday. He'd been pulling his robes over his head. His shirt had risen up. Theo had been stood in the dorm, also changing. They were on their way to Quidditch practice. He heard Theo's sharp intake of breath and looked over. Theo's blue eyes were on him, taking in the black and purple swirling bruise over his ribs. The injury looked brutal, he realized. It wrapped around his side from his hip under his arm, various malevolent shades of purple. He'd not bothered to heal it past the broken rib, thinking it was hidden. It was only a bruise. He'd been too busy focusing on his ankle. Draco? Theo began. What the fuck? Their eyes met. He saw understanding dawn in Knott's eyes. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. Blaze came skidding in, too, then. Whoa, Malfoy! Got into a fight with the Whomping Willow, did you? He said, his eyebrows raised at the injury. No. Fucking fell off my broom, didn't I? He said, trying to smile to laugh it off. Theo and Blaze both knew he wouldn't have fallen off his broom. They'd seen him in action, knew he was exceptionally talented at flying. They both just looked at him for a moment. He busied himself changing, not meeting their eye. The thing was, he actually had fallen off, but it was only because he'd been pulled off. When he was with his real friends, he didn't goad, he didn't tease. He let them all talk, joke, bounce off each other. He mostly just watched. He didn't feel like he had much to say that anyone would ever want to hear. He'd spent so much time alone. He didn't think he'd quite learned how to be a real boy yet. Pansy didn't seem to mind. He'd noticed how she always came to stand or sit next to him. He saw her eyes always trying to catch his. He was aware that when they were walking anywhere, she'd pretend to stumble, grab his arm, or let her fingers brush against his. He saw it all, but he had no idea what to do with it. He liked Pansy. She always had his back, hissing at people as he taunted them, laughing when they stumbled as he pushed them. But he didn't really like her. Not like that. His eyes still searched out Granger in every room. Draco loved how big her hair was. It made her easy to spot. The pleasure he felt as she eviscerated Weasley during lessons or put her hand up to answer the most obscure of questions warmed him. It made him feel something other than hate. But then that feeling soared in his stomach as he thought of his father, of Caro's leering face. She wasn't safe. There was more than one Malfoy with his cold eyes on her. Now they were a few months into third year. He didn't understand how the term went so fast when the holidays seemed to go so slowly. It was a few weeks after the horrific episode with the hippogriff that he realized he really was in trouble when it came to Granger. His arm was mostly healed again now, but he wore the sling to rest it in when the pain became too much. He was embarrassed by how much he had revealed his agony that day. Glad his father hadn't been there to watch him roll around on the ground. He would have found it hilarious. But the feeling of those bones breaking again, the visceral memories they brought up, taking him back to those nightmarish days at the manor when he was small, when there was no Hogwarts to hide at. Those had been the feelings that had stopped him occluding, stopped him being able to keep his pain inside. He'd scream as much out of mental anguish as he had from physical pain. He was used to the physical pain, an expert. He had sat next to her in class the day Lupin was absent. Clearly it was a full moon, and he was off screaming somewhere, tearing at his skin. Draco felt like he knew the feeling. Snape was teaching the class. He had sat down next to Goyle and felt a disappointed relief when she wasn't there. Snape had stormed through the room like an old crow, eyeballing Potter, gunning for him. He'd just told them the page number to turn to when suddenly Draco became aware of a gentle, sweet aroma he associated with Granger, like the honeysuckle that grew in the manor gardens. His head jerked up, and to his consternation, she was sat at the desk next to him, Potter on her other side. Their eyes met for only a second. He felt his stomach drop. The warmth that was always there made his insides feel weird. It hurt in a different way to the pain he was used to, but a pain all the same. Snape was gibbering on about werewolves. Granger was reeling off facts. She finished with, "It only responds to the call of its own kind," and he didn't know what came over him. He wanted to get her attention somehow, even though he vowed to keep away from her. He howled a loud wolf sound, obnoxiously. Her eyes flashed to his, and she glared at him. It did something to Draco, that flash of angry eye contact. His stomach clenched. She held his eyes for a fraction of a second longer than was comfortable, and he wondered if she could see that his walls crumbled when he looked at her. But she turned her eyes away again, her face flushed, her chest rising and falling. She looked down again at her book as Snape chastised her, before flicking her eyes to his once again. He'd forgotten to stop looking at her, and the warm honey brown poured thick and hot over the ice in his heart again. Gods, he hated her. Hated her for putting herself in his firing lane. Why couldn't she just stay under the radar? Why did she have to be so there all the time? He distracted himself by drawing a nasty picture of Potter and making it into a paper crane. He sent it over towards them, putting his hands out and blowing it. As he did, he met her eyes again. She was watching him, her eyes on his lips as he blew. He needed to leave, to get out of that class. She was making him crazy. He had spent a lot of time that year learning how to make wards, protection charms that could be directed at a person. A charm to make you forget them, forget what their face looked like, if only for a few hours, so that they could escape from somewhere. Charms that could be thrown over a person like a net, protecting them from curses or stopping them from being hexed. It would also work on someone trying to force their way into a person's mind, if it was strong enough. He worked on performing the charms, making sure that he could do them wandlessly as well as with his wand in his hand. He realized over the past few months that his magic was becoming more powerful. He was having to hide it in class now. He felt it pushing out of his skin as he sat. He felt like he could explode sometimes with a tingle of magic under his skin. If he felt anger or fear, it nipped at him, teeth snapping. It wanted to be set free. He wasn't sure if his brand of magic was one that he should be letting out into the world. Even at 13, he felt it. His magic had been born from hatred, fear, and loneliness. It was dark, cultivated in the black, cold world of the manor, and reflected who he was, who he would always be. He just hoped that if he ever really needed it, he could control it, harness it. He wasn't sure that he could. Hermione, May 2006. Hermione stood in the pensive room, her mind racing. Draco Malfoy had seemed scared that his father would talk to her. What could possibly be the reason? Harry had never said a word to her about the note. Could it be that he'd never seen it? She hadn't voluntarily gone near Malfoy for much of the next few years anyway. There had been so much going on. She tried to think back to whether he'd gone near her, but her memories of school were hazy. It had been a while, and a lot had happened. She avoided thinking about that one brief incident in 6th year. She'd get to that when she came to it. She wondered if it would appear in his memory archives anywhere, wondered if his recollection would be better than her own fire whiskey-addled one. Her head was hurting. She couldn't think too much. She siphoned the 1992 memory back out carefully and selected the next one. February 1994, their 3rd year. She poured the memory in, watched it swirl, then dipped her face in. Malfoy was down in the Slytherin common room. He was sat with Blaise and Theo, his arm in a sling. They were asking him about the hippogriff. He gave short, one-word answers. "Your father's coming to Hogwarts today then, Malfoy?" Blaise asked. "To make sure the job is done on the big chicken?" The corner of Malfoy's mouth quirked up, but he didn't look like he found it particularly funny. "Yes, he's coming for a meeting with Dumbledore. He wants to make sure everyone knows he won't put up with anyone hurting his precious son." The sarcasm dripped from his voice. Blaise seemed utterly unaware of it, but Theo gave him a sidelong glance. She watched them then, doing some homework, Malfoy giving both Blaise and Theo the answers to everything. He had been so much more intelligent than she realized. She was fascinated by how different Draco was down here in the common room when he wasn't seemingly put on a show. His face looked different, less pointy. His eyes lost that cruel edge. The gray seemed more of a pale silvery blue. She watched as they dressed in their winter robes and left the common room. All around them was talk of Buckbeak's imminent execution. As Draco walked, Slytherins were clamoring, calling his name, congratulating him, and telling him that Buckbeak deserved it. Hermione didn't see him respond. She watched as he agreed to go and watch the execution from the hilltop, observing the instant, arrogant swagger he affected, the change in him startling. He stood with Goyle and Theodore Nott, looking down at Hagrid's cottage. Hermione thought that Draco didn't look glad. He looked angry. His face was pale, his eyes hard, his jaw clenched as he looked down. She saw then in the memory herself, Harry, and Ron heading down the hill towards him. He had seen them coming. She could see the rage in her own eyes. She remembered how she had seen this situation play out, how angry she had been with him, for his spite, for his lack of regard for anyone. "Ah, come to see the show?" He nodded, his mask back on. She had spat hateful words at him, called him all the names she could think of. She heard the venom in her own voice, watched his eyes darken as she hissed into his face. Her wand came out, pressed under his chin. Malfoy didn't fight back. He didn't do anything. He let her point her wand at him. He just closed his eyes and waited, his face screwed up as though he were terrified. She had thought it was cowardice at the time, but now she wasn't so sure. She watched herself take her wand away at Ron's insistence and then bring her hand back before she slapped him as hard as she could. She remembered the way his cheek had felt under her palm, remembered the red-hot anger turning into satisfaction as she connected with the soft skin of his face. She had thought at the time that she was the first person to hurt him. She knew now how terribly wrong she was. She watched herself walk away, and Malfoy turned from his friends and head in the opposite direction. He had a smile on his face. Hermione followed him now into the toilets. He made his way to the cubicle, slamming the door. She watched him put a hand to the place where she had slapped him, and a smile again. It was the strangest smile she'd ever seen. Satisfied, sad, and hungry all at once. He looked up to the sky and closed his eyes. She watched him clench his fists, his chest heave. He was still for a long moment. She couldn't tell what emotion he was feeling until suddenly he opened his eyes. He shot his hand out and the toilet cubicle suddenly exploded out from him, the noise deafening. He looked at the main toilet door. It slammed shut, the door shuddering in the frame with the force. He cast his eyes now to each sink. They shattered one by one, porcelain flying into the air, the taps exploding, water shooting several feet in the air, soaking him, his hair plastered to his face, dripping into his eyes, his robe sticking to him. He turned his head, hands darting forward, every mirror cracked, exploding violently. Shards showered down on him, but he didn't seem to notice. Everywhere Draco looked, there was more destruction. He stood in the middle, a 13-year-old boy, his eyes blank with rage, and he screamed as he destroyed the bathroom. Then abruptly, he stopped. He yanked his nails down his face, his chest heaving. She watched his eyes cool again, the shutters come down, his fists clenched, and he breathed slow and easy. Bit by bit, piece by piece, the toilet rebuilt itself, every shard of glass finding its way back to where it had come from, the cubicle rising back up around him. He waved his wand, drying himself. He sat now, calm in the cubicle, as only moments later Nott entered, apparently none the wiser. "Malfoy, your dad just come out of Dumbledore's office. He wants to see you before he leaves." She watched as Draco left the cubicle, calm and cold as ice. He washed his hands and left, good-naturedly bumping into Theo as he passed, Theo shoving him back and them both laughing. He looked totally relaxed as he walked into Dumbledore's office, nonchalant. His eyes narrowed as he saw his father, half out the door, his back to Draco, speaking to Dumbledore. "Yes, well, I'm glad to see it's been dealt with appropriately," Lucius was saying. Dumbledore mumbled an incoherent response before going back in and shutting the door firmly. "Ah, Draco, how is your arm, son?" Lucius asked as he approached. Malfoy didn't react, just stood and looked at his father, who glanced around before hissing, "Are you doing as you've been told? Have you got her on your side yet?" Draco looked evasive. Who was Lucius talking about? He leaned in towards Draco now. "Tick-tock, Draco. I'd better hear of progress in the next few months, or I don't need to remind you of the consequences. You befriend Granger. You make her trust you. We want her, and you are going to bring her to us. Understand?" Draco's eyes remained blank, occluded, as he nodded. "Yes, father." Hermione wondered how Lucius couldn't see it. His eyes were completely different. Did he not know his own son well enough? She supposed not. Hermione jumped as the memory version of Malfoy did, when suddenly the doors at the end of the corridor slammed open and a stream of students began filing through. She became aware of herself in the crowd. As Malfoy also saw her, his eyes flicked to her, then back to his father, and as Hermione watched in front of her eyes, she disappeared from the crowd, just vanished. She wasn't there anymore. She had been disillusioned. Ron still seemed to be having a conversation, but it was with thin air. Malfoy's eyes were on the spot where she'd been, his lips moving silently. His father's eyes were also roving the crowd. He hadn't seen Draco uttering the spell. "She's not here," Malfoy said. "Must be in a different class." Lucius looked at him disdainfully one last time, then swept away his final words to his son. "Do not fail me, Draco. Make me proud." As the memory faded and Hermione drew her face up from the water, the last thing she saw was herself reappear in the crowd, back, walking with her friends. Her headache was bad now. Her brain just couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Lucius Malfoy had been looking for her? Draco Malfoy was hiding her? Why? She thought of Draco in the boys' bathroom. It made her stomach feel weak with a sick sort of fascination. The level of power he had demonstrated in that one moment was absolutely terrifying. He had been just 13. She had watched as he destroyed an entire room effortlessly. Hermione didn't need to know how he had defeated Voldemort as an adult. If he was that powerful as a teenager, she couldn't imagine what he would have been capable of by 20. She almost didn't want to watch another memory, but she knew she needed to make the most of her time with the Pensieve. The way things were going, she needed to make the most of some uninterrupted time checking over the memories. She chose the next memory by date, December 1994. She knew before she even tipped the memory in that it would be the Yule Ball. Draco was stood awkwardly in the great hall. Hermione could see that he was uncomfortable immediately. All around him, people were discussing the Yule Ball, who they would be taking, what they would be wearing. He was in a group with Blaise and Theo. Blaise was animated. He had secured a date with one of the Beauxbaton girls, Marilla Junip. He was describing his game plan to Draco and Theo, who both stood, clearly not listening to him, their eyes elsewhere. "And if I keep speaking French, telling her everything she wants to hear, I think she'll definitely kiss me," Blaise was saying. Hermione rolled her eyes. Ginny went wild for him when he spoke French to her. Even now. Draco was studiously avoiding the eyes of Pansy Parkinson, who hovered just outside of the group. She kept looking over to Draco, a hopeful expression on her face. Theo's eyes also kept sliding towards Pansy. Neither boy answered any of Blaise's insane questions about what color silk handkerchief he should put in his breast pocket, or if they thought she'd prefer him to conjure lilies or roses. It took Blaise a good 5 minutes before he became aware of the fact that he was essentially speaking to 2 brick walls. That made Hermione smile. He had always been a talker then. Eventually, he looked between the 2 of them, glanced back at Pansy and said, "Oh, for God's sake, one of you needs to ask her. Who's it going to be?" Theo immediately looked to Draco. There was hope in his eyes. Draco looked resigned. He chewed the inside of his lip, seeming to be trying to make some sort of decision. He looked stressed. Hermione almost marveled at how much worry this caused him when she'd seen the carnage he had caused in mere seconds in the toilet during the previous memory. "I'll ask her," he said eventually, although he looked like he was going to the gallows. Theo visibly sagged. Hermione guessed he knew back then that Draco would definitely be Pansy's first choice. The light went out of his blue eyes slightly, and he began scanning the room. "Well, go on then," Blaise said. "Do it now before she goes mad and hexes anyone who looks at you. She said she was going to get whoever you asked with the bat bogey curse." She watched Draco purse his lips at that. He put his head down and headed over to where Pansy was sitting. Pansy's eyes lit up as Draco approached. Hermione almost felt sorry for Pansy in that moment, almost saw the human underneath the viper-like personality. "Draco, hi," Pansy had breathed. Her eyes twinkled as he sat on the bench next to her. She seemed to almost hold her breath. Hermione looked at him closely, and she could see what Pansy saw. She wondered how she never had back then. He was tall and broad now, his shoulders and arms filling out the gray V-neck jumper he wore over his white shirt. His green Slytherin tie was loosened at his neck. His hair spiked up at the front, falling over his face slightly. There was none of the arrogant swagger she had detested so much in school, and without it, his face was softer, his eyes gentler. She saw that although he clearly didn't want to be asking Pansy to the ball, that he cared about her. He didn't want to hurt her. She thought back to the note he had scribbled in the book. Draco Malfoy is dangerous. He wants to hurt her. So far, she'd seen no evidence of him particularly wanting to hurt anyone. "So, Pans," he began. His voice was so different, without the awful pompousness he forced into it. I was wondering if you don't already have a date, whether you'd..." "Yes!" Pansy practically squealed. "I'll go with you, Draco." She leaned over and pecked him on the cheek, a wide smile on her face. Draco's face flamed, and he looked hideously embarrassed. Hermione watched Pansy stand up and walk away, smiling. She broke into a run the second she got past the table, grabbing hold of some of her girlfriends and pulling them out of the great hall, her abject excitement evident. Pansy didn't see Theo watching her enviously across the hall. Draco, for his part, hung his head for a moment, twisting his signet ring around his finger. Then he took a deep breath and stood up to leave the great hall, looking like he had just been sentenced to death rather than a date. The memory jumped now to the night of the Yule Ball. Hermione watched Draco and Blaise attempting to put their bow ties on. Her heart melted slightly at the sight of them, laughing, their teenage boy fingers fumbling with the complex knot of silk. And she wondered whether either of them had realized they just could do it magically. Eventually, they were both done. Draco slipped into an ivory waistcoat and did up the small buttons along his front before shrugging into the black jacket of his dress robes. Hermione remembered the breathless whispers of the girls as he had walked in that night. There was no denying he looked incredibly handsome. The ivory should have clashed with his hair and his skin, but it didn't. It made him look like a pale, dangerous angel. A fallen angel of sorts, Hermione thought now. She remembered rolling her eyes as she listened to the girls around her, and remembered how she tried to tell herself that he did not, in fact, look as handsome as everyone made him out to be. But even she had had to let her eyes drift over him for a second longer than she should have. Blaise and Theo both also looked gorgeous in their suits. She wondered whether Ginny had noticed Blaise that night. His suit molded to his athletic body, brown eyes shining with excitement. Theo was less obvious about it than Blaise, but Hermione thought the blue of his bow tie looked lovely against the blue of his eyes. Pansy came gliding into the room. Her dress was floaty, a pink frilly affair. Her hair was styled into a sleek updo. She had makeup on. Her lips were pink and glittering, and her heels were high. She looked at Draco, waiting for his reaction. Hermione could see the effort she had gone to, how hard she had tried to get him to see her the way she wanted him to. Her eyes looked towards him shyly. She smiled a coy smile. Hermione watched as Draco swallowed hard. A hand came up and he fiddled with his bow tie. You look nice, Pans. Nice skirt. Dress. Shall we go? He was uncomfortable, and so was Blaze. He'd always been good at reading people, Hermione knew. It was what made him good at his job. Theo didn't say anything. He was looking at Pansy, looking the way she wanted Draco to. But Pansy hadn't noticed. Her shoulders had slumped. She looked dejected. She hadn't had the response she wanted. Hermione watched the Slytherins all put on their mask as they left the common room. Pansy's spiteful expression side eyes at the other girls, eyebrows raised, sneering at their outfits. She held the arm of Draco proudly, possessively, as he led their group to the table, his own matching sneer in place. Blaze had bounded off to his Beauxbaton date, and Theo was reluctantly dancing with his, a Slytherin girl Hermione couldn't quite place. Theo's eyes never left Pansy, though. Hermione thought he was down bad. If she didn't know how things had panned out for them, she would have thought he was going to get his heart broken. She watched now and felt her stomach clench as she saw herself enter with Victor. She had felt so grown up at the time. She realized now that she had had no idea how to do her hair, her makeup. She felt and looked ridiculous. Draco, however, was watching her. His eyes had widened. He had gone stock still. She watched his great eyes follow her, and only her, as she walked with Victor and the other champions to their partners, ready for the first dance. She could see her own nerves, not surprising as one, she couldn't dance, and two, at the time, she had been so overwhelmed by Victor, so enamored by him. She could see Ron in the background. He looked jealous. She wondered now, had it been Harry all along that he had been jealous of? Had he known even then? Pansy had also seen Draco looking at her, she thought. Pansy's eyes were on Draco's, tracking their movements. She seemed to set her jaw as she took his hand, pulling him to join the dance at the requisite time. They'd all been taught the dance, so Draco, after looking briefly like he wanted to die, joined in. Hermione watched the elegance of which he moved, clearly a sign of his breeding, but also reminiscent of the way she'd seen him duel later on, sure-footed, confident. Pansy clung to him, pulling his body close to hers. She attempted to look up to his face, but he kept his eyes resolutely forward. And yes, Hermione could see they kept darting to her. Hermione watched. She thought back to the note. Did he want to hurt her? Was this what the looks were about? Was he waiting to get her alone? She knew that he hadn't. He hadn't gone near her other than during this dance. But still, as they all changed partners and he was paired with the Beauxbaton girl, he smiled politely at her and spun her around skillfully. His eyes still found Hermione. She saw herself, 2 left feet, her hair beginning to frizz already. What was he looking at so intently? She watched as the dance spun her towards Malfoy. She remembered her irritation at the time. He had held her too closely. She had felt it was a power game, but as she watched him now, she saw their few seconds of dancing in a new light. Draco's hand was on her waist. It was firm, but there was a slight tremble there. She watched him, dipped his head very slightly to her hair, and he inhaled deeply, his eyes closing briefly and his hand tightening at her waist. His face was tense. He looked almost pained. The eyes were down, casting over her bare shoulder, her arms to their joined fingers. She remembered waiting for it to end, relieved when it did. His expression as she spun away was different. He looked disappointed. His shoulders sagged as he took his next partner. He now looked away, disinterested. As the night drew on, Hermione saw herself dancing with Victor. Ron and Harry sat gloomily in the corner. Blaise was wooing his Beauxbaton girl, grinning and smiling. Theo was nowhere to be seen. Draco was sitting, too, in another corner, his eyes glittering as he followed her around the room. Pansy sat leaning against him, occasionally darting her eyes up to his face. "Shall we dance, Draco?" she asked hopefully. I'm not really a dancer, Pans," he replied. Her face fell, and she sat for another moment before she suddenly let out a strangled sound, a cry of frustration. Hermione watched as Pansy stood. Tears began to stream down her face, and she ran as best as she could on her high heels out of the great hall. Draco watched her go, his face a picture of confusion and guilt. He brought his ringed hand up to scrub at his face. He fisted a hand through his hair. Blaise had noticed. He left his girl on the dance floor, motioning to her that he would be back. "You need to go after her, Malfoy." "What?" "You need to tell her, let her know gently, that it's never going to happen. You're breaking her heart, Draco, and it's not fair." She watched Draco look at Blaise, surprise turning into resignation. He chewed his lip. Eventually he nodded. Blaise clapped him on the shoulder. "Good luck," he said. "I'll pray for you." "If I'm not back in an hour, she's drowned me in the Black Lake," Draco replied. "Tell Theo he's still not having my bed." Blaise winked at him and headed back to his date. She watched Draco look up to where she was, getting a drink with Victor once more, before sighing and heading out of the castle. He was right, and Pansy was down by the Black Lake. She was sat on Draco's black jacket, her arms wrapped around her knees. There were tears drying on her face as she looked out to the lake. She looked up with a gasp as Draco approached. "Draco!" Her voice was hopeful. She rubbed a hand over her face. "You came after me?" He sat down heavily next to her, also looking out to the lake, but he didn't say anything. Pansy watched him, the hope in her face fading slowly. "You're never going to want me, are you?" she asked him, her voice soft, so different to any voice Hermione had ever heard her use. Draco looked to her, his eyes finally meeting hers. He looked sad. Hermione felt like she was seeing these people for the first time in her life. They were so incredibly far removed from her own memories of them. "I'm so sorry, Pens," he said eventually, and Hermione thought she was watching Pansy's heart break. "Why not?" she asked, her voice raw. "I love you, Draco. I always have. You know, I'd be there for you always. I'll have your back through anything." She was beginning to shout now. "I'll do anything for you, Draco. You know it. So why? Why won't you love me back? Is it someone else?" He shook his head, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Pansy dropped her head to her hands. "It's not you," Draco said after a time. "It's me. I'm not sure I'm capable of love. Not like you want." "Is it your father?" she asked. I know he's horrible. No, Draco shouted. Don't bring him into this. It's got nothing to do with anything. He looked furious as he rose to stand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Draco. Pansy was panicking. She knew she'd said the wrong thing. Draco stopped. All the air seemed to leave him, and he sagged back down to sit on his jacket again. He turned to her, his eyes almost pleading. Theo, though, Pens, he does like you. A lot. Pansy stopped mid-sob. He does? Really? Yes, really. Oh, Pansy said, as though she never really considered Theo at all. He loves you the way you want, the way I can't. I care about you so much, but it will never, ever be more than that. I'm so sorry. Pansy didn't reply. She sat next to him and let the silent tears roll down her face. Then she leaned into him. He brought an arm up around her shoulder. But I'll always be your friend, Pansy. I'll always be here for you, too. I'll fight for you. I'd hurt people for you. They both grinned. They sat then, looking out to the lake, neither saying anything. After a time, Pansy stood. I'm going back in, she said. Can't let this dress go to waste. She pasted a sad smile on her face. Coming? No, I'm going to stay out here for a bit, Draco replied. No more dancing for me. She smiled, bent down, and kissed the top of his head, her eyes closing, her face a picture of pain. And she turned and left. Hermione felt like she could cry herself watching them. She had only felt a fraction of what Pansy seemed to when she broke up with Ron, but she remembered the pain well. Pansy looked like she was in agony. Draco remained sat on his jacket at the black lake for a long time. He focused on the water, sending ripple after ripple over the surface, his eyes on the black depths. He stood up then, and Hermione cried out with a shock as he suddenly turned, facing the tree he had been sitting under, and roared in an angry, rage-filled shout. She watched him punch at the trunk of the tree, angry, brutal punches, his knuckles ripping almost instantly, blood flicking from them into the white of his shirt. He kept punching, not seeming to be aware of the damage of his fist, until he suddenly raised his arm and the tree groaned as it raised from the ground, the roots screaming, protesting, mud and grass falling down from Draco as he stood. He kept going until the tree was fully free from the ground, and then he let it drop with a deafening crash. His shoulders were heaving, his eyes black, pupils blown. He stood, calm now, his body shaking as he stood and surveyed his destruction. For fuck's sake, Granger, he muttered as he stood, blood covering his white shirt, eyes already beginning to go blank, the emotion leaving them. The memory began to fade as she saw him begin to replant the tree, the ground shuddering as he did so. The last shreds of memory dimmed away, and Hermione lifted her head. She felt a lance of pain in the base of her skull and stumbled, sitting down on the floor against the pensive. She felt like these memories were driving her mad, like he was driving her mad. The more she saw the real Draco Malfoy, the less she could bring herself to hate him. She didn't know what she was feeling. She was confused. She was suddenly brought out of her reverie, though, by the sound of a hard rap on the door of the pensive room. She scrambled to her feet, heels sliding on the floor, and opened the door. Simmons was there. "Granger, your time is up with the pensive," he said. "And you'd better get up top. Potter wants to talk to you. Apparently, one of the witnesses has been saying something weird and involves you." Hi, guys. Thank you if you made it through that chapter. Thank you for listening. I am so sorry that there's background noise. You can hear my son yelling at one point, my neighbors talking or loud music, and my voice is just very poppy because I struggle with respiratory things. But if you made it through that chapter, thank you for going along that journey with me. Like I said in my community post, I'm going to try to do these more in bulk so they're out more consistently. If you have any suggestions or if you have any ideas on what I should read next, let me know. Enjoy. Have a good day and Happy New Year.